Navigating the gambling regulatory landscape in South Africa. The gambling regulatory landscape in South Africa has evolved significantly from its historical roots, reflecting broader socio-political changes since the mid-20th century. Initially governed by strict prohibitions, the sector began to transform with the enactment of the Gambling Act of 1965, which legalized limited gambling activities. The post-apartheid era saw a wave of reforms aimed at creating a comprehensive legal framework, culminating in the National Gambling Act of 1996, which legalized various forms of gambling, including casinos and a national lottery, and established a system for licensing and regulation. Today, South Africa's gambling industry operates under a dual regulatory system, combining national oversight through the National Gambling Board, NGB, and provincial authorities that enforce regional gambling laws. This decentralized structure allows provinces to tailor their regulations while maintaining compliance with national standards. Despite these advancements, the regulatory environment faces ongoing challenges, including the enforcement of laws against illegal gambling operations, the adaptation to technological advancements in online betting, and the balancing of competing interests among stakeholders in the gambling ecosystem. Controversies persist, particularly around the legalization of online gambling and interactive gaming, which has faced resistance from established land-based operators and regulatory hurdles. The National Gambling Amendment Act of 2008 attempted to address these issues but has seen limited success in implementation, highlighting the complex dynamics at play within the industry. Additionally, concerns regarding problem gambling and the social impacts of gambling continue to prompt discussions about the need for stricter regulatory measures and consumer protections. As the gambling landscape in South Africa continues to evolve, regulatory authorities are tasked with navigating these complexities while seeking to foster a responsible and sustainable gambling environment that addresses the interests of all stakeholders. The future of gambling regulation in South Africa will likely involve a focus on improving compliance mechanisms, adapting to technological innovations, and protecting vulnerable populations amid ongoing changes in the industry. Gambling regulation in South Africa has undergone significant transformations since the mid-20th century, reflecting the country's shifting political and social landscape. Pre-1965 era. Before the introduction of formal gambling regulations, indigenous South Africans engaged in simple games of chance using dice and stones. With the arrival of European colonizers, these practices evolved into more organized forms of gambling, such as horse racing and card games. However, throughout much of the early 20th century, legal gambling options were largely restricted to horse racing, with other forms prohibited. The landscape of gambling regulation changed dramatically with the enactment of the Gambling Act of 1965, which rendered all forms of gambling illegal except for on-course horse racing betting. Despite this prohibition, it is estimated that around 2,000 illegal casinos operated clandestinely, particularly in the Bantustans, which were territories allocated to major ethnic groups during the apartheid era. Post-apartheid reforms. The end of apartheid in 1994 marked a pivotal moment for gambling legislation in South Africa. The new democratic government sought to legalize and regulate gambling as a means to generate revenue and create jobs. This culminated in the National Gambling Act of 1996, which established a legal framework for the licensing and control of gambling activities, allowing for the opening of licensed casinos and the creation of a national lottery. The National Gambling Act of 2004 introduced significant amendments to the regulatory landscape. It repealed the 1996 Act and established the National Gambling Board, tasked with overseeing compliance, licensing, and regulation of the gambling industry. This act maintained a ban on online casino games but permitted online sports betting and horse race betting, provided the operators held the necessary provincial licenses. In 2008, the National Gambling Amendment Act aimed to legalize interactive gambling but faced resistance from land-based gambling establishments and anti-money laundering authorities, hindering its implementation. Current regulatory framework today, the gambling sector is overseen by a combination of national and provincial regulators. The National Gambling Board, along with provincial regulators, is responsible for ensuring compliance with the law and facilitating a framework for legal gambling. Despite the legalization of various forms of gambling, challenges remain, particularly in adapting to technological advancements and addressing illegal gambling activities. The regulation of gambling in South Africa operates within a framework that combines national and provincial governance, allowing for a unique interaction between various authorities. The National Gambling Board. The primary national regulatory body overseeing the gambling industry is the National Gambling Board, NGB, which was established under the National Gambling Act of 2004. The NGB is tasked with regulating, supervising, and promoting responsible gambling behaviors throughout the country. Its core functions include licensing, although it does not issue licenses directly. Instead, it sets minimum standards and regulations that provincial regulators must follow. Additionally, the NGB oversees compliance with gambling legislation across provinces, collects data and conducts research on the gambling market, and develops national standards for game safety and fair play. Each of South Africa's 9 provinces has its own gambling statutes, which are rooted in the legalization of gambling that occurred in 1995. These statutes grant provincial regulators significant autonomy in administering gambling within their jurisdictions. The nature of their enforcement can vary widely, with some provinces adopting more liberal approaches while others maintain stricter regulations. This decentralization reflects the broad constitutional mandate of concurrent competency, enabling provinces to tailor their approaches to gambling as long as they remain compliant with national laws. Interprovincial comity. Despite the variances in provincial regulations, a practice of de facto comity exists among provincial regulators, allowing for cross-border transactions between bookmakers and punters. This means that as long as gambling activities are regulated by at least one provincial authority, participants from different provinces can engage in gambling transactions freely. One of the significant challenges faced by regulatory authorities in South Africa is the enforcement of gambling laws. The effectiveness of these regulators often relies on the cooperation of the South African Police Service and the National Prosecuting Authority, which can be limited due to resource constraints. This has led to frustrations in prosecuting illegal gambling activities, particularly those requiring international cooperation. Recent legislative context. The National Gambling Act of 1996 initially legalized various forms of gambling, setting up a regulatory framework that included a national lottery and licensed casinos. However, subsequent amendments, such as the National Gambling Amendment Act of 2008, have faced hurdles that have prevented the effective legalization of interactive gambling services. Although online sports betting remains legal with appropriate licensing, the complex landscape of regulations continues to evolve in response to technological advancements and market demands. Types of gambling in South Africa. South Africa has a diverse and regulated gambling landscape that encompasses various forms of betting and gaming activities. The major types of gambling available in the country include retail sports betting, online betting, casino gaming, lottery participation, and horse racing. Retail sports betting is a popular activity in South Africa, with numerous betting shops operated by licensed companies across the provinces. These establishments are regulated by provincial gambling authorities, ensuring that operations are conducted within legal frameworks. Notable retail betting operators include SuperBets and Hollywood Bets, which have a significant presence nationwide. Although horse racing still accounts for over half of the retail betting sector, sports betting has seen considerable growth over the past few years, contributing to an expected market value of R2.9 billion in 2019. Online gambling has become a favored option among South Africans, with many players engaging in casino games through offshore websites. Despite government efforts to regulate this sector, the popularity of online casinos licensed in jurisdictions such as the United Kingdom and Malta remains strong. Notably, South African software provider Microgaming adheres to local laws and does not permit its games to be played for real money within the country. In addition to casino games, online betting operators offer a variety of sports betting options, allowing users to place wagers on both local and international events. The casino industry in South Africa is robust, with 38 casinos operating as of 2019. The legal framework allows for a maximum of 40 retail gambling venues, and the industry has experienced substantial growth, with gross gaming revenue doubling over a 15-year period. Prominent casinos such as Grand West Casino and Entertainment World, Hemingway's Casino Hotel, and Frontier Inn & Casino provide a range of gaming experiences, including slots, table games, and various entertainment options. Lottery participation is legal in South Africa, primarily facilitated through the National Lottery, which operates under the Lotteries Act No. 57 of 1997. This act regulates lottery operations and oversees the distribution of profits to community projects. South Africans can purchase lottery tickets through official channels, including banking apps and the National Lottery website. Additionally, lotto betting, where individuals can wager on the outcomes of lotteries worldwide, is also permitted through licensed operators such as Lottoland. Horse racing remains a significant segment of the South African gambling market, with a long-standing tradition and a dedicated following. Bets on horse races are offered at both retail locations and through online platforms, contributing to the overall growth of the gambling sector in the country. National Gambling Act of 2004. The National Gambling Act of 2004 serves as the primary national legislation governing the gambling landscape in South Africa. It outlines the broad definitions of legal gambling types, standards, and policies. This act was enacted following the legalization of gambling in 1995 and introduced minor reforms to the earlier 1996 legislation. One of its key features was the directive to finalize further provisions for interactive gambling within 2 years of its promulgation, which necessitated the formation of a special statutory committee to advise the Minister of Trade and Industry on the draft legislation. The objective of the National Gambling Act is multifaceted. It aims to coordinate national and provincial legislative competence over gambling activities, establish uniform norms and standards for regulation and licensing, and ensure the continued oversight of the gambling sector. The Act retained the National Gambling Board and established the National Gambling Policy Council while repealing the National Gambling Act of 1996, which initially set up a framework for licensed casinos and a national lottery, along with distributing gambling licenses among provinces. Licensing within the gambling industry is stringently regulated. The application process requires detailed disclosure documents from all business entities involved in the ownership of the applicant, extending down to the ultimate beneficial owner level. Regulators maintain a generally business-friendly approach, prioritizing clarity and compliance over punitive measures for minor administrative issues. However, obtaining a license is often a lengthy and sporadic process, with many activities seeing considerable intervals between requests for applications. In addition to the National Gambling Commission, each of South Africa's 9 provinces has its own gambling regulatory body. The 9 provincial gambling regulatory bodies are Eastern Cape Gambling and Betting Board, Free State Gambling, Liquor and Tourism Authority, Gauteng Gambling Board, KWA Zulu Natal Gambling and Betting Board, Limpopo Gambling Board, Mpumalanga Economic Regulator, Northern Cape Gambling Board, Northwest Gambling Board and Western Cape Gambling and Racing Board. These provincial regulators work within a framework of established laws but also enjoy some latitude in their approach to licensing and enforcement. The collaboration and comity among provincial regulators facilitate cross-border transactions, allowing bookmakers from different provinces to interact, provided the gambling activities comply with the relevant provincial regulations. In South Africa, the licensing process for gambling activities is governed by both national and provincial regulations, which can differ significantly across regions. The National Gambling Board of South Africa, NGB, plays a critical role in overseeing compliance and establishing minimum standards, but provincial authorities are responsible for the actual issuance of licenses. Types of gambling licenses. There are several categories of gambling licenses in South Africa, each catering to different forms of gambling activities. Casino license. Casino licenses are among the most regulated and expensive, designed for large-scale operations that include table games and slot machines. Applicants must demonstrate financial sustainability through audited statements and undergo rigorous background checks. Betting license. This license covers various forms of wagering, including sports betting, and is particularly prevalent in regions with established online betting frameworks, such as the Western Cape. Operators are required to maintain transparent and secure betting systems, and responsible gambling measures must be in place. Bingo license. Bingo license. This license permits the operation of both traditional and electronic bingo games, with a strong emphasis on ensuring fair play and player safety. Slot machine license. This license allows establishments such as pubs to install a limited number of slot machines. Machines must be certified by the South African Bureau of Standards, SABS, and operators often face restrictions on the number of machines they can operate. Lottery licenses govern the operation of lottery games, ensuring compliance with national regulations while promoting transparency and fairness. The process to obtain a gambling license typically involves several key stages, which can take between 5 to 12 months depending on the province. Application and initial assessment. This preliminary review of documents can take several weeks to a month to ensure completeness. Due diligence and financial assessment. Conducted over a period of up to 3 months. This assessment evaluates the applicant's financial stability, business history, and reputation. Prospective operators must prepare comprehensive documentation, including a detailed business plan that outlines the mission, financial projections, and operational strategies. Ownership information and funding sources to demonstrate financial stability. Compliance with provincial and national technical standards, including measures for responsible gambling and digital security for online platforms. The costs associated with obtaining a gambling license can vary widely based on the type of license and province. Operators should factor in not only the regulatory fees but also potential legal and consulting expenses. It is advisable to engage legal experts who specialize in gambling regulations to navigate the complex application process effectively. Understanding and adhering to the regulatory framework is essential for successful licensing and ongoing compliance in South Africa's dynamic gambling landscape. Regulating the gambling industry in South Africa presents numerous challenges, largely due to the complex interplay of stakeholder interests, outdated legislative frameworks, and the rapid evolution of technology in gambling. One of the primary difficulties faced by regulators is balancing the interests of various stakeholders, including players, land-based operators, and government entities. The necessity to address social impacts such as addiction and problem gambling while still fostering a competitive environment for operators creates a challenging regulatory landscape. Policies must be developed with consideration for all perspectives, which often complicates the decision-making process. The existing legislative frameworks are often seen as deficient or outdated, lacking uniform norms and standards that could facilitate effective regulation. There is a notable absence of comprehensive regulations in certain jurisdictions, leading to practices such as the dumping of obsolete gambling devices and illegal online operators exploiting regulatory gaps. Although the introduction of the Remote Gambling Bill aims to enhance compliance measures, the practical enforcement of these regulations remains a significant challenge, particularly regarding offshore operations. The lack of coordination among regulatory bodies further complicates compliance tracking and enforcement efforts, as regulators often depend on the stretched resources of the South African Police Service and the National Prosecuting Authority for support. Rapid advancements in technology pose another challenge for regulators, who must continuously adapt existing laws to cover new forms of gambling and online platforms. The increasing prevalence of online gambling has resulted in a de facto regulatory environment where operators can exploit ambiguities in the law, thereby complicating the enforcement of compliance and consumer protection measures. Regulators must remain proactive and informed about these technological developments to effectively manage the gambling landscape. The prevalence of illegal gambling operations exacerbates the regulatory challenges faced in South Africa. Prior to the legalization of casinos in 1996, a significant number of illegal slot machines operated without oversight, generating tax evasion and contributing to criminal activities such as prostitution and drug trafficking. Today, illegal gambling continues to exist, providing entertainment without any consumer protections and often targeting vulnerable populations. The future of gambling regulation in South Africa faces significant challenges and opportunities as it navigates the complexities of modern gaming environments and technological advancements. Despite recent discussions regarding legislative changes, the outlook for substantial reforms within the next year remains pessimistic. A critical aspect of any new legislation will be the formulation and promulgation of substantial secondary regulations to provide operational clarity and enforceability, which may take several years to finalize before a bill can become law. The introduction of a de facto and de jure online gambling regime presents a pathway to enhance regulatory coherence and effectiveness. Current regulations struggle with a lack of uniform norms and standards, which has resulted in illegal operators exploiting regulatory gaps. This has led to significant economic drawbacks, including job losses and diminished tax revenues for the government. As the industry evolves, there is an increasing need for regulators to keep pace with technological advancements and to ensure that regulatory frameworks are robust enough to handle new forms of gambling that emerge. South Africa has seen a notable rise in digital infrastructure and disruptive technologies, which have facilitated the growth of the online gambling sector. However, the rapid evolution of technology also poses challenges for regulators, who must continuously adapt to ensure consumer protection and fair play. The need for increased regulatory capacity is evident, as regulators must remain informed and skilled in emerging gambling technologies, such as cryptocurrencies and blockchain. This dynamic landscape requires regulators to be proactive in addressing the risks associated with these innovations. A future-focused regulatory framework must also emphasize the protection of vulnerable groups, particularly in light of the potential exacerbation of problem gambling due to the proliferation of online gambling options. There are calls for stricter enforcement of penalties for regulatory breaches and for a cultural shift towards productivity rather than gambling promotion. Moreover, A carefully calibrated regulatory environment can contribute positively to the economy by safeguarding players from illegal and unscrupulous operators, thus enhancing public trust and revenue generation.